despite all of my understanding, like despite all of my academic knowledge and my scientific training, and despite the fact that I've been talking about this for many years now, like these topics for many years now. After my best friend Pamyak was shot and killed, none of that helped me. Like none of my knowledge and my scientific training helped me deal with it. And so I felt like I needed something more. I just spiraled into this depression, and despite my knowledge of all of these things, of the statistics, of everything, none of them were helping me. And luckily, I have this I guess skill to write, which I am very lucky to have, and that not many people have. But I had an outlet, I had a way to express myself and hopefully, explore my struggles.
Hi, I'm David Hoffman. I want to welcome you to Transformations 2.0. This is a video series that explores major life transformations across a broad range of different people. I'm really pleased today to have as our guest Dr. E.J. David. E.J. is a professor of community psychology at the University of Alaska Anchorage. One of the things that I love about the book is that, there's a large literature about racism, and especially within the disciplines of psychology and sociology. And what you were able to do, and the death of Pamyak was a man of color, was killed by a white police officer in circumstances similar to police shootings that we've heard about around the country. One of the things that's profound about this book is you bring emotion and a deep literature of the knowledge of race to this issue, and yet you move through it in a way that's not angry. It's a meditation of what you're experiencing, and that there is anger, but you're not primarily striking out. How were you able to move beyond pure anger in describing this to something deeper?
Well, that's a great question, and I appreciate you saying that. But first, before I answer that question, I just want to say that that there are still many times that I get angry.
Yeah.
It's something that comes back, and I think it's a very legitimate, valid emotion to be angry when there's something that is that you can be legitimately angry about. But yeah, and so here one of the ways that I was able to get through past anger is because I realized eventually that I cannot just operate out of and be driven by anger. Especially when I was writing to my children, I cannot pass that on to my children, and I cannot, I cannot genuinely advise my children to deal with things that way and to be driven by that emotion, despite all of the injustices, that's been happening for many generations now, despite all of the injustices that they themselves, might directly experience as they move through this world. I cannot, as a father, I cannot advise my children to be driven by anger in response to all of those things. And so, because I've seen that if we respond with anger, it is us that also gets penalized for it. As legitimate and as valid as anger is, as an emotion and as a reaction, I know that that's a dangerous response. And also, so I don't want my children to get hurt, but also, I realize that that's not, to be driven by anger, it's not going to lead us to really the changes that we want to see. It's not going to lead us to even if you do not get hurt when you respond with anger, even if you do get what you want when you respond with anger, it's not the change that we eventually want to see in this world. And so, yeah, to go beyond ourselves, to see like more collective, large-scale changes. I can respond with anger and be maybe fine for myself, but yeah, it's not. It doesn't have any long-term benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, I've read through the book very carefully twice, one in pre-publication form and then after it was published, and it's not accurate to say that I read my way through it. To be more accurate, I should say I cried my way through it. And part of the reason I think I cried so much was because it was just a beautiful book. You were sharing your spirit, and the courage that it took to do that inspired me. Part of the reason I cried was it's very clear in your book and very clear in the literature that your children, who are my grandchildren, are at greater risk of harm due to their heritage than white kids. So could you sort of describe some of those sources of harm and sort of statistically in terms of placing them in the context of our society?
Yeah, so as I've shared before, with my job as a professor, and especially as a professor and researcher that does work in this area, I'm familiar with the research, and I see statistics showing, for instance, that Native kids have the highest rate of suicide ideation in the country. That they're at higher risk for abusing substances, that they're at higher risk for dropping out of school, and then there are very similar research, about Filipino kids and Filipino boys and Filipino girls. Filipino girls and Native girls are, at high risk for becoming victims of sex trafficking, of being sexually abused, of being victims of domestic violence. For instance, just right now, just current data shows that Native girls and Native women, 1 out of 2 of them will become victims of some form of violence, whether it's sexual violence or domestic violence of some sort, right? 1 out of 2 Native girls or women. I mean, right now I have 3 Native girls or women living in my household, and you're telling me that 1 out of 2 of them will become victim of some sort of violence, And so, to me, this is more than just statistics, right? To me, these are more than just numbers, and we're talking about people that I love, people that I care about, and so it cuts deep, right? It cuts deep. So yeah, I don't know. I don't. Your question was what again? Like how? So we might have to cut through.
Well,
that
that your kids are at greater.
Oh yeah.
So EJ, a large part of your early work was describing colonial mentality, and you did a number of innovative tests to sort of diagnose that and describe it. Increasingly, you're interested in identifying intervention strategies to help people get over colonial mentality, and more specifically this phenomena of internalized oppression or of holding oneself back. So what are some of the ways that people can, attack internalized oppression, overcome some of these psychological barriers that are holding them back?
Yeah. Well, I think without going into too much detail about the tests and the interventions, I think a key component there when we're addressing colonial mentality or internalized oppression more generally is that to remember that people are not born feeling ashamed or embarrassed of their culture or their identities. So just to give myself as an example, there was one I guess, egregious example or symptom, I guess, or manifestation of colonial mentality is the use of skin whitening products, whether it be lotion or going to clinics for treatments or whatnot. So to me, people are not born wanting to have lighter skin tones. And so something must have happened along the way as they were growing up in this world, that taught them, that led to them learning or believing that for them to do better in this world, they needed to have lighter skin tones, right? And so to me, the first key step there is to understand that these beliefs and these behaviors that are manifestations of colonial mentality or internalized oppression were taught and they were learned. And so once you realize that, then we can start the process of unlearning. Right? And so just to kind of package everything in a few minutes, I think the process of addressing internalized oppression must have 4 components, and I call them 4 connections, which actually is very similar to that game, Connect 4.
Yeah.
Right? But anyway, there are 4 types of connections that I think is important, and it's related to what I just shared earlier. One is to make connections between what happened in the past, whether that is your group's historical past or your own past, your own upbringing, your personal upbringing, to make connections between the past and the current, to understand that the past had a lot to do with shaping who you are now, right? So that kind of connections. The other kind of connections that we must make is to understand that our socio-political conditions, our environment, see the connection between that, like what our society is teaching us and how we feel about ourselves and our mental health and our well-being, right? To see that there is a connection between what's happening in our world and us as people. So that's the second kind of connection. The third connection is to make the connection between our personal experiences and the experiences of other people like us. So whether that be, the experiences, and for my case, other, Filipinos, the experience of other Filipinos, right? Or if you're a woman, the experiences of other women, right? But to see your connections between, to see the connections between you and other people like you. And then also, the fourth connection is to see the connections between you, your group, and other groups of people, right? So for example, for me, and I think I talk a lot about it in this book, is really the connections between the Filipino experience and the connections of and the experiences of Native Americans and Alaska Natives, and make those connections, because to me, making these connections not only leads to personal insight, but actually reminds us that we're not alone in these struggles that we're experiencing, that there are many other people out there who are undergoing the same things. So it gives us strength, really. And then the more connections that we build, when we get to the fourth connection there, when we see that many other groups of people may have experienced the same things or may be struggling with the same things, then it actually not only is it something that is empowering, but it actually makes the movement, right, more formidable. So to me, I think those are the 4 components.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Just an observation here. I might add that I think your 4 children are about the least oppressed human beings that I know.
They're great kids. Yeah.
So I want to talk about a final transition. About 11 years ago, you made a major transition when you had your first son, Laka, and 2 months ago, you had your 4th child, Tala. Can you talk a little bit about the transition into becoming a father and taking on that new role?
Yeah. And again, it's not like, transitioning from not being a father to a father was huge. So when we had Laka, that was a big change. All of a sudden, it wasn't just me and Margaret anymore. All of a sudden, we're responsible for this human being, right? So that definitely come with huge changes. However, just to be completely frank, it's not like, I changed immediately when that happened. I mean, I still made many mistakes even after Laka came along, and I still would feel like I want to go do something without consulting Margaret and without thinking about our kids, Um, but I think now, and now I think with the fourth baby now, I think I'm in a very different place. But generally, though, I think one of the bigger changes for me, becoming a father and transitioning to fatherhood from just being a single, independent, completely independent person, is I don't know. It's this understanding that I am not going to be around forever. I mean, I just, maybe that came with age too.
Mm-hmm.
But understanding that I'm not going to be around forever, and and that has many implications. Some folks might take that to mean that means I'm not going to be here forever to take care of my children. But to be honest with you, I'm not really worried about that. I'm not worried about me being around forever to take care of my children. It's more about, my worry is about, what am I leaving my children?
Uh-huh.
Like, what am I, when my children think back and they try to remember me, what will they remember? That's the kind of I guess realization that I'm working on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And and when I'm gone and my children try to remember me, I want them to remember somebody who struggled, somebody who who suffered with colonial mentality and internalized oppression. And as much as I talk about internalized suppression, and as much as I study it and try to address it today, I'll be the first to say that I probably still suffer with some level of internalized suppression to this day. And I want my children to understand that, but I also want my children, when they remember me, to also see that I continued to try to do better,
Mm-hmm.
and that I continued to resist, and I continued to fight. I hope they see somebody who didn't succumb.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us today?
I think what you're doing here is great. Yeah, the other thing, I guess, I mean, just more generally, when I was thinking about transformation, right? Which is really what this is about, what you're doing, just transformations in general. And I was thinking about one of the bigger transformations of my life, which you asked me in the beginning, which is me trying to become better, right? And for many of us, that's what we try to do when we transform. We hope that when we transform into something that is better, right? Like from a caterpillar to a butterfly, for example, right? Which is great. But one thought that I thought about, because when I apply that to that struggle, to me transitioning into America as a young boy and trying to become as American as possible, me wanting to become a butterfly was actually the problem. That perhaps there was nothing wrong with being a caterpillar. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's just one thing that I hope we kind of think about more deeply when we think about transformations, is what are we trying to transform to,
Yeah.
right? And who's deciding that it's better to transform to that next phase?
Yeah. That's really interesting, because the inspiration for this series was a health crisis I went through, and I got to the other end, and I thought, I want to do things that really matter during the last years of my life, because having confronted death, you think about what you've thought about, what am I leaving behind? And really, my journey of transformation is maybe a journey to get back to my origins, to get back to the original me, to the real me. And so, as I seek to become a butterfly, maybe I'm really seeking to become the original caterpillar. So,
You know, because you have become a butterfly in many ways, right? You've succeeded in so many ways, you know, in different aspects of your life, you know, so you've become a butterfly already.
that's interesting. Maybe for the sake of my grandchildren, I should identify my inner caterpillar.
Yeah.
I like that. I'll think about that for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Good. Well, I sure appreciate having you here today, and I love you and appreciate how you're raising my grandchildren and how you treat my daughter, and it's a pleasure to be both a fan and your neighbor.
Hey. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And you can support this series in 3 ways. You can click, like, and subscribe.
And great story was one of the founders said, you know, are you in school? What are you guys doing? They said, no, we got kicked out for this reason or another, and we're not going to school. We'd actually really like to go back to school. And she said, you know what? If you want to, I can call the homeschool and get you all set up on homeschooling and maybe get you back on track. So they started a little homeschool tutoring program in the coffee shop, which was just great. Bye-bye.